Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks out there. Welcome to Professor X's School for Gifted Youngsters. No, actually, welcome to excuse me, RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ. I got really confused right there for just a moment. Lost where I was because on this channel, we talk all things tabletop role playing games, but we're also going to be talking the X-Men, and I got a little tongue tied there because I was thinking of both of them. So we are going through a Monster Mayhem series, and we are going to use the X-Men and their greater rogues gallery to not only funnel to organize our thoughts. It's going to be our theme, but we're also going to use it to expand our thoughts in creating encounters and monsters and adversaries for our tabletop role-playing games, especially fantasy, classic Dungeons and Dragons. And we're going to use the X-Men, the world of the X-Men, as a basis for that. So one of the great things I think about using a team's rogues gallery is that in more often than not in role-playing games, although there are a lot of solo games, you're going to have a number of player characters. You're going to have a number of your friends, people interested in playing the game, and they are going to uh, be noble knights and sneaky thieves and wizards with spells and so on and so forth, shape changers and psychics and all different kinds of divergent races and backgrounds and such. They come together. This motley crew of heroes comes together and goes on missions, and the X-Men kind of represents that, right? And most of the X-Men from issue, I'm going to say, I believe it was 98 of the original X-Men series. I'm pulling the strings there, using my memory because I'm a gentleman of a certain age. And the X-Men became very much an international um, rainbow coalition of characters from all the nations around the world with mutant abilities that ran a very huge gamut. And so the X-Men kind of represents that. Now, the other part of the X-Men, the core essential value of the X-Men, is that the word mutant and the idea of being a mutant and coming to your adolescence is a core part of the X-Men. It is this idea that random individuals are born with a gene, an X gene of sorts, and through trauma and or adolescence, their ability comes out. They may not know who they are, and so it is very much a coming of age type of story, as well as the fact that it also represents prejudice, that the word and the ability and the affliction of being a mutant represents all of the prejudices throughout history in our world. People who are looked at differently, whether they are from a different country and nationality, whether they are looked at suspiciously, like during the witch trials, all the way up to modern day. Uh, Hated for your sexuality, your race, your religion, etc. And it represented that. And so, although throughout the history of the comic book X-Men, the X-Men have been interdimensional travelers. They've traveled through time. They've gone to alien worlds and planets and traveled through space. Essentially, they've always come back home. And the X-Men have always been this rebel group. In many ways, have been this rebel group in the Marvel universe. They're the ones that are on the outside, and the other heroes have come in conflict with them. And although they have been looked at as suspicious, and we'll get into the the details of that when it comes to their why it is that the rogues gallery that is surrounding the X-Men focuses in on basically mutant abilities and the differences they have with society. So let's get into some of the names and individuals that have risen to the top of the X-Men's rogues gallery. And I know many of you are going to know a number of these. Now, we're going to start out with excuse me, we're going to start out with Magneto and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. And there's no greater, I think, as a number one, there's no greater character, even story wise, that really embraces the idea of being a mutant and changes in your position in society than Magneto and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Now, uh, for those who've lived under a rock and never seen the original X-Men movie, the opening of that movie is incredible, traumatic, very dramatic in terms of its positioning. Where Magneto's classic origin is that he was in a camp for Jews, Auschwitz camp. And in that camp, they take away his mom and his dad, and his mutant ability comes out during that particular time in this dirty, muddy, rainy camp imprisoned by the German military. And from then on, he's known and almost been fueled by the horrors that humanity has towards each other for being different. And he's become the the icon, the spokesperson, the advocate for mutants, and that maybe human beings need to be second tier, and mutants need to be at the top tier individuals. And what I love about Magneto is that, especially the way Magneto was portrayed by Ian Kellen and Patrick Stewart as playing Professor X against each other, is that on one hand, you do have an enemy who, he's pretty dangerous and lethal, but also is willing to sit down and talk, to play chess, to have a conversation, to speak over tea and biscuits or something. This is an individual who has an ideological difference, but is on the same side. And that's where I love the idea of not just an enemy, but an adversary. Imagine the player characters are this rebel band of individuals, and there are these noble knights that want to defend the countryside, just as our main protagonists want to defend the countryside from evil incursions. Now, they may not get along. They may even think differently. Like, for example, maybe the city state intends on closing its walls off against a greater enemy that is going to be a threat. But sure, the city state is filled with 50,000 people, but there's a small tribe of a small village of 100 individuals on the outside. One group may say, the noble knights might say, you know what? We don't want to alert the enemy. They're just going to have to be, they're going to have to just be sacrificial. They didn't make it here. Whatever, we're going to close the doors, and those 100 are just going to have to live out there and suffer at the enemy. Whereas maybe our protagonists are like, no, we need to go out there, rescue those 100, do a forced march, get them back here, get them inside the walls. It doesn't matter if the enemy knows that we lose element of surprise. We need to save their lives. And that's a good example of, two sides having the same goal. We want to protect as many people as possible, but how do you do it? What do you feel guilt after doing something like that? Maybe those 100 people do suffer at the hands of the enemy, and maybe there's a crime committed. And also, this also brings up the fact that outside of the X-Men, the actions of other mutants reflects on the X-Men themselves, and they have no choice in the matter. They don't know. They Around the world, as the mutant gene is exposed and young people are born with these great abilities that are uncontrolled, they have no idea what that mutant ability is going to be or how dangerous it will be, that those actions reflect on them. And the population then takes action against the X-Men. Oh, someone in Madagascar, instantly catches on fire and emulates themselves and burns down their house. It's because of you muties. We hate all you muties. And the X-Men may have to not only save the life of maybe an innocent, 12-year-old child, but also have to deal with the fact that maybe they become militarized and start rounding up people who have the X gene, or they start demanding people get blood tested because of having to see whether they have an X gene or not, and such. And that's been the the push and pull, the conflict within the X-Men world. In fantasy, this could very easily be, you're not going to necessarily have mutants per se, but it could very easily be those who are practitioners of magic, maybe sorceress origins, those who are born with with the genetic makeup of anything out there, whether it's like demons and fiends like tieflings, whether it's dragons and someone's dragon blooded and they need to be stopped. Uh, Sorcerers and dragonborn might get collected together. Well, of course, there's the classic dark elves or drow elves from the Underdark. Maybe a battle or a war with the surface world caused this, and so all dark elves and anyone who's befriends dark elves are seen as enemies because we can't trust them. So it's very easy to insert this into your game world, especially if history is just moving forward or there are events outside the player characters' hands. Yes, Kitty. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Here's your receipt. Um, that is Sophie Boo Boo. Uh, so, what is going on here? Seems like the chat is not showing. Okay, we'll keep on going. The Another element of the X-Men is what I love is the social aspect of it, in the sense that a lot of times in the X-Men comics, it's not just a matter of them showing up and punching people in the throat, which does happen, but they're during these battles. A lot of times, there's this bigger issue of how to handle, you know, being different in a world that doesn't like you and that is afraid of you, and how to handle that. Do you we may have one character who has we've well, there's plenty of characters in the X-Men universe that have blue skin, and some are told to, you know, they have to hide who and what they are. So in a fantasy realm, maybe they wear a large, deep cloak, and they must use magic or heck, just plain old makeup, or walk around with a mask on their face or whatnot, or hide in the shadows because I can't allow my ears to be seen, or my strange colored skin, or let anyone know that I have scaled flesh and a long serpentine tail or something like that, and they have to hide themselves. But then there's also the opposite of that. There are others who are like, I'm proud of who and what I am. I'm proud to be this, and if people hate me, so what? But I'm going to live out in the open and be damned to anybody that brings a weapon against me. And of course, there's also propaganda is spread. There are those who take advantage of situations of hate and prejudice. There are many demagogues out there. There are people who uh, even inwardly they could care less about hating a group of elves or group of goblinoids or group of magi. They don't care, but they want power. And what better way to gain power than to manipulate people's emotions? Emotional manipulation is a very powerful tool. People don't question their emotional stakes, and especially when it comes to fear. And in your world, if there's a good reason to fear a fiendish incursion, side effect, they might start blaming those cambions, those tieflings, those people that have fiendish blood running through their veins, despite the fact that maybe we don't really have very much evidence. But the fear that they may one day turn on us, they're only pretending to be our friends. They're not really our friends. They are in league with demonic entities from other worlds, and they're here to corrupt you. And people might start going like, yeah, you know what? You're right. They do have devil horns. See, I told you. They do practice magic. Yep, they sure do. But they've been fighting our enemies. They're only fighting our enemies to garner our trust, and et cetera, et cetera. So Magneto, very charismatic, older gentleman. This individual who has gathered a number of other mutants, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, the counterpart to the X-Men, and in many ways, like talking about Rogues Gallery, talking about a Rogues Gallery dealing with teams. Oftentimes, the Rogues Gallery of teams is of themselves their own rogues gallery. So the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, that Magneto has gathered these other mutants around him, these other individuals, disparate characters in many ways are a dark reflection of our player characters. So instead of a paladin, maybe you have one in this group. You maybe there's um, an oath breaker or anti paladin, or I don't know, a hell knight or whatever you want to call it. Like you might have a dark reflection of whatever the other player characters are. And Magneto, as far as like role like stat blocking, Magneto very much falls into the category of like lich or any kind of powerful, charismatic warlord, mystic, anything like that. And I would dare say that you could probably reskin any extremely high challenge rating, uh, double digits. You got to go 12, 15, way up into the 20s, and just reskin this individual as being charismatic and powerful and being surrounded by other followers. Now, there's another character here that I'm over here on a comic vine right now looking at the what's the title of this X-Men Main Rogues Gallery, it says. Now there's another character named Mystique, and Mystique very much a doppelganger. We don't even need to argue that fact, although very much Mystique could very well be a one of the other shape changing monster types in Dungeons and Dragons, like a hag or a Rakshasa. I think even maybe even an ogre magi or what's been now known as an oni would fit very well. Now Mystique is an assassin, terrorist. She's been alive for a very long time. She's blue skinned and can take on the physically shape change herself and take on the features of other individuals. And she's also highly skilled. And throughout the X-Men world, I believe she's been known as retconned as the mother of Nightcrawler, who also has blue skin. And she was the adoptive mother of Rogue very long ago. I don't even know if they even mention that any longer. And she has teamed up with a number of individuals. And she's a great foil for your player characters. This is a character who Mystique would not necessarily stand up to a band of heroes, but she very much would sell secrets. She's a monkey wrench that gets thrown into the plans of the player characters. She's like a worm tongue type character who might speak into the ear of other enemies of the player characters, giving away secrets and um, uh, being one step ahead of the player characters. There's an old mid 80s, I want to say you think that she is killing the X-Men one by one as she uses their weaknesses against them. Even at one point, she's fighting Wolverine, who, Wolverine, of course, badass on his own, and she uses a blade. She slips a blade into her fingertip, slices against his throat, and they say something to the effect of, like, he would bleed out long before his healing factor could stop him from dying or something. Like she knew a weak point that he had. And then come to find out, of course, that this wasn't true. She was training with another character named Arcade, who has these elaborate, realistic, and very lethal arcade worlds, essentially death traps. And uh, and now whether that's true what she said about Wolverine and the other characters using their weaknesses against them, don't know. But uh, rest assured that she is someone who most likely amongst any other X-Men villain, adversary, knows their weaknesses. And having a character who wants to live and fight another day. Yes, we know that Mystique has been an ally in the movies, and that's another great thing too. The player characters may need to use her as a contact, may exchange information. Heck, she might even be you want to do this very rarely, but she may even be a Deus ex machina who pulls the PCs um, out of the fire after they jumped out of the frying pan, and she may save their lives for her own purposes and such. So th- I think this would be a great foil. This character could even be a previous player character who sits in the background, someone who's extremely neutral, works for her own, his or her own purposes, or its own purposes, their own purposes, I guess would be preferable, prony to use, and may not work for money, but might work for favors, or even have another particular agenda. Like, hey, when society changes the way they think about who we are, I'm just going to be on the winning side. Do we go to war against the goodly races to accept us, or do we combine together and we all live with each other hunky dory like, or whatnot? Don't know. Now, there's another character known as Bolivar Trask, and Trask doesn't have any mutant abilities at all, but Trask is basically a political individual who hates mutants. And this individual may be very charismatic, have a lot of influence, and might just be spreading bad information, the anti-bard, spreading lies and deceit and manipulating people against the player characters. Again, um, a a very public individual. Maybe there's a reason. I'm sure many player characters will want to just put a crossbow bolt in the back of the head of a character like this, but maybe they have so much influence that it would absolutely be against the player character's best interests to harm this individual. So just a regular zero level, although not necessarily need to be zero level, uh, a commoner who's willing to get on top of their proverbial soapbox and speak against the player characters. Maybe this individual has suffered trauma at the hands of adventurers like the player characters, or the player characters themselves. An NPC that was tried to befriend the player characters and was smacked aside, or a player character, you know, did the typical burnt down the tavern, and the tavern owner is like, I hate them, I'm going to speak up against them, something like that. Or it could just be just an innocent, just maybe just jealousy, or again, it could be very much real trauma. The player characters cause a death, injury and death to someone that they've loved, but a very personal hate, a smoldering hate that cannot be stopped, and they speak up against the player characters and might turn nobles or rich merchants, or heck, maybe even just the next town over, against the player characters, and they need to go against that. We also, Trask was also in many ways involved with the Sentinel program. So we're going into Sentinels, and Sentinels are a great mindless, let's insert these for the player characters to let the player characters prove, basically take the kid gloves off, right? Like, they can show how much of a badass they are, and just really wreck shop with constructs. And Sentinels are absolutely positively wave after wave of constructs, whether they are gear forged or war forged in AI machines that exist in your world, whether they are golems that are ancient statues, whether they are created off of an assembly line by gnomish or dwarven inventors, doesn't really matter. They could be spewing out smoke out the top of their heads, or they might be the animated guardians of given life by an ancient sphinx or something to go after the player characters. But the Sentinels on the lower level really allows the player characters to rip their heads off, destroy their limbs, and work as a team together to destroy them. But the other part of Sentinels is that they're unstoppable. They don't that You can't reason with them. They are out on a mission, normally controlled by some other entity from behind the scenes, or they are they permutate the instructions that they are previously given, much like the idea of the original Days of Future Past, that the Sentinels were like, oh, we're going to protect humanity, and the mainframe was like, okay, how do we protect humanity? I know, let's put everybody in camps, circle up all the mutants, and humanity can live inside these protected camps, and we'll make sure that we have our guns drawn and they can live behind our feet. And so the other part of Sentinels is having the player characters, well, run in fear. They can't be reasoned with. And so, running in fear and running away from the idea that sure, we can all beat ass on one or two Sentinels, but 16 of them and 37 of them and 164 of them and 508 of them coming after us and so on. Maybe we need to get the hell out of here. And the player characters might even be able to flip the script on society and take out these mindless constructs that might be storming through small communities and large city-state walls and stuff to go after the player characters and anyone like them. And the population might say, okay, whoa, 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 whoa. We don't like these dragon-blooded people either, but destroying our city walls and disrupting our way of life, that's not exactly what we were thinking of. So the player characters might be able to garner some kind of respect that way. To go along with that, there's another character named William Stryker. William Stryker and Bolivar Trask kind of fall into similar categories. Trask is more of the inventor, scientist, political individual, more mouthy than anything, but Stryker is more military. Of course, a mutant hater, suffered trauma. In the movies, there's a version of Stryker who has a child who has a mutant gene and he hates it and he uses his own child to siphon off the child's, I don't know, neurological fluids or something uh, to use that against other mutants. Does pretty much thinks of mutants as no more than pets or objects. And this kind of character, sure, Stryker isn't very physical in the comic books until later on, but someone who's able to go on a battlefield, who or is a military leader and is out to recruit as many to acquire as many resources as possible to hurt our player characters and to hurt other innocent people that are thrown into the same category of mutants, like I was saying, like dragon blooded or dragonborn or fiendish origins or arcane casters or heck gnomes or elves or whatever the case may be. The people from, I don't know, a distant nation and whatnot. Basically, a, a person with guns and hate in their heart. Now, another character here, not really given a lot of airtime in the comic books, but I like this character because this character kind of I love the third pillar of exploration, and this character kind of makes me feel good, and that's a character of Arcade. Arcade is a comic book poor man's excuse to use the third pillar of exploration and create death traps and such. Arcade dresses pretty ridiculously. A little bit of a combination of like the Riddler and the Joker in the DC comics. And Arcade often has, well, with the name Arcade, often has a giant arcade that usually these are like one-off comic books where they need to take a break between two story elements. And so they throw our protagonists into a realm that Arcade has created, and the player characters, the X-Men in this case, have to navigate through traps and obstacles. And in the case of mutants and mutant kind, maybe there is somebody who, like a lich that has created a dungeon for no other purpose than to see if the people can survive inside of it, or maybe there's someone powerful enough to create these traps, one trap after another, in some nether dimension or a distant island or something like that, to maybe test the skill or metal or the the personalities and motivations of our main characters. So while Arcade isn't necessarily deals with mutants specifically in our context, maybe there is someone who creates obstacles for the player characters to navigate around. And of course, one of the great things about using obstacles is to test the strength and speed and endurance, the physical attributes of our player characters. We can do classic traps like swinging pendulums and pit trap floors and rooms filling with fluids and uh, crushing walls and ceilings that are going to collapse and poisonous gases, the physical elements of it. Then there's also the psychological and intellectual elements of it, navigating through mazes, trying to figure out which key goes into which keyhole, things of that nature. And I'm not really a fan. I love complex story element obstacles, not one and done. I go back to a classic one I did with constructs. They were basically iron golems, and they all had a key around their neck and a keyhole in their back, much like giant sized, very dangerous toys. And the player characters needed to run away from the iron golems, but at the same time take a key off of each one and figure out which key unlocks or turns off the back of the other one. So they had to get in close proximity or use magic and other skills, pole arms and 10-foot poles to try to get the keys off of the necks of these golems that are chasing the PCs around the dungeon floor. And I had a lot of fun with that one. But there's all kinds of things that you can do with obstacles, whether it's using height, use a lot of space, timing elements. Escalation really works very well. Randomly targeting different individuals in rooms and locations and stuff works. Now we're going to get into. I'm going to classify this as New World Order. Magneto falls into this category as well of New World Order characters. Magneto far closely related to our protagonists. Maybe they have a relationship with them. For example, a player character might be a warlock or a cleric or a wizard, and this individual might have been like Magneto might have been a mentor, or they might be the same age and grew up together, and now they're on opposite sides of the same goal. Now these other characters are like New World Order individuals. They're very difficult to reason with, but they think on a higher plane. Many of them are generations, maybe even centuries older, and more intrinsic, deeply entrenched into the world than our main player characters. And these are characters like Apocalypse, Mr. Sinister. Here's another one. Strife is another one. Selene, the Shadow King. I'm going to loop these individuals together as New World Order. They absolutely fall into the category of most fiends, most liches in worlds where they just want to remake the world. Not too many people here, Mike. I've just been speaking out to the void, but I think when people tune in, they'll get a lot from it. I've just been a talking head at this moment, talking about the X-Men and the Rogues, the X-Men Rogues Gallery, and how one of the great things about having a team, using a team Rogues Gallery for your mind fuel, is that each member of the Rogues Gallery of a team, oftentimes they also have their own teams. So Magneto has the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and we have like William Stryker, who's a military agent who has his own organization, Trask, who has Sentinels as their enemy, that kind of thing. So I for those who are familiar with the X-Men, I'm lumping like Apocalypse, Mr. Sinister, Strife, the Shadow King, Selene, and some of these other characters. The Goblin, what's her name? That used to be Jean Grey's clone, the Goblin Queen. I'm lumping them all together as New World Order characters. Basically, almost a classic Lich type character, very old or fiend. People that have been around so long that once the player characters bump up against them, I think Vampanoy mentions something here as well. Vampanoy mentions that cults that worship an ancient being fall into that category. Absolutely. Erasing your question mark. Absolutely. Like, for example, in manipulating mutant kind, a lot of these characters were in existence before the word mutant even came around. So they became like cultish figures. And so instead of being hated by society, people loved them and worshiped them and were sycophants to them. And so on one hand, your protagonist might be like, wow, this, Apocalypse is like except for the name Apocalypse. Abin Sir. No, wow, I just went Green Lantern. Uh, with that one. Sorry about that. I can't remember. I can't remember Apocalypse's given name, but anyway, the player characters might be kind of tired of getting like rotten fruit thrown at them. Probably wondering like, why are people walking around with baskets of rotten fruit? But anyway, as rotten fruit gets thrown at them from the population, when they come upon someone who is a cult leader, and there are individuals who love them, our main protagonist might say, "Wow, well, that maybe we might follow this person." You know, uh, Mike Gould says, "Is it En Sabiner? That's it." Abin Sur. I guess I don't know. Marvel and DC, they love to steal things from each other all the time. So maybe that had something to do with it. Mike Gould says the X-Men are a source of interpersonal drama as well. When it comes to villains, if you're looking for a twisted Feywild event, consider Mojo. Yeah, Mojo's world. Yeah, literally born spineless and using the ugly folk, which are all very attractive as their entertainment and such. Yeah, and um, I like the idea of having the interpersonal part of using the X-Men in terms of how society reacts to them. Like I said, for example, you could have a dragonborn that wears a cloak and doesn't want anybody to see them, and there might be another dragonborn that's like, I'm not going to hide my scaled body from anyone, but that may or may not change the way people see them. And again, mutant kind is it's a stand-in for prejudice of any and all types, and so the X-Men, it's not that I feel role-playing games should have kid gloves and there shouldn't be any prejudice at all. What we need is a catharsis. If you're going to have people throwing rotten fruit at the player characters at some point should be able to punch those same people in the throat, and prove themselves better than. So, yeah. Mike Gould says, perfect place for the gibbering mouther sportscaster. What do you say, Bob? I don't know, Bob. Hey, Bob. Yeah, Bob. Although giving each mouth of a gibbering mouth or a different name, but being a sportscaster, that's pretty hilarious. I think that would be awesome, and makes sense that it would drive you insane if you heard it all the time. Policies are like, "Shut up!" Hey, listen, the gibbering mouth is like, "Look, I'm just trying to give everybody a play-by-play. Not everybody's got cable here. Not everybody's on a streaming service." Michael says mutants correlate with sorcerers too. Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Mentioned that earlier, like the idea of being born a certain way rather than choosing to a wizard who chooses to learn arcane magic is different than a sorcerer who is born with something. Now, every character doesn't need to be a sorcerer. There could be some element, like for example, maybe there is a racial type in your world that is hated. It could be a mark, like a dragon mark or something. That it doesn't matter what player character you play, you are playing a character that has been marked in some kind of way. And it is very dangerous. Maybe people in different city states check to see if someone has this mark on them, or that mark might be a tattoo. It could be a skin tone. It could be a specific other racial trait like horns or eye color or something of that nature. It may be something arcane, like, hey, when exposed to a certain thing, the player characters are exposed as being born from the outer worlds. Like maybe there is um, a glowing holograph appears over the heads of the player characters when a certain confluence of events happen, and people are scared of that. Yeah. Mike says, well, any half species might count too. Half elves, half orcs, tieflings, Asimar. Exactly. Exactly. And again, this doesn't need to be, I think what some people fail to realize when it comes to prejudice is that it doesn't need to make sense. Most prejudices don't make sense when you break it down, but there are many people in societies that love to take advantage of prejudices, even if they have no prejudices at all. right? So, and when you add on to that the fact that there are many people who sociologically they don't want to be the outsider. Like I'm sure many of us would like, I don't hate mutants. Why would I hate mutants? Just because one child was born and turned into a ball of fire doesn't mean all children with an X gene are like that. You Those individuals still may not want to speak up because they might be ostracized. Oh, so you're just a mutie lover, and it's like, no, I'm not that either. I'm not one or the other. And most people, we know in our society, we have a hard time thinking past organizations of two. It's usually love or hate, enemy or friend, eat it or vomit, kill it or save it. Like we tend not to, as large groups of people, have a lot of nuance. So there are many people who say, "Well, I don't have problems with mutants," but everyone around you is going, "Oh, you don't have problem with mutants, then you must love them." It's like, well, no, not that either. But yes, we know how people are. Dante says mutant villain is a neat idea. Like with the sorcerer, in a world where they all have one heritage, the mutant heritages could be PCs and adversaries. Absolutely, they could all have the same origins. Whether it is something like um, maybe it's just genetic, and over many generations, people are born a certain way. Maybe there was a an event that happened, like a comet fell from the sky or meteor or something. Comet crossed the sky, meteor fell from the sky. You know what I mean? And affected people, or maybe it's just a legacy thing. Like it's been 5 generations since the Great War with the Goblinoids, but everyone born with Goblinoid blood, even the slightest, maybe a PC is playing a human, but they have a little Goblinoid trait with them, maybe their teeth or their ears or something, and everybody hates the Goblinoids because of that Great War that caused such massive destruction. Doesn't matter that it's not going on now. Everyone is like, yeah, well, we don't trust you anyway, because what's going to happen when you go back into your goblinoid warlike state? You're like, look, I just wanted to buy a sandwich. I don't know what you're talking about. Vampanoid says a butterfly birthmark on their lower back is a sign of the chosen one. You've got the tramp stamp. Pull down your undies. The knight's like, what? Turn around, pull your undies down. I need to check your crack. You have the tramp stamp. You all have it. Mike Gould says, having played a draconic sorcerer who couldn't hide who they were, I can tell you that a Magneto outlook was fitting. Exactly. Or, now, mind you, this could be an arcane side effect. Like, whenever a player character does a thing, their the exaltation of their powers alerts other people that they are this type. So what I mean by that is, even if a player character is playing like a ranger or a fighter or barbarian, maybe they glow, or they have uh, they transform a little bit, or there's something about them like, hey, I'm not just Fightor, but when I draw my blade, the glow of the ancients surrounds me, and everyone's like, oh, they've got the glow of the ancients. We hate them, don't we? Or we fear them. And there's nuance when it comes to prejudice and hate. There's the new. What I mean by the nuance is people can be hated because they're jealous of you. People could be hated because they are afraid of you. They could be hated because they feel like they they don't matter anymore in a world where you are now a evolutionarily a higher tier um level. A lot of times people have hate because you threaten their position in the world. You've affected their social status, and you've pushed them down inadvertently, because now that you're above them, there's a social status ladder, even unconsciously, that people dislike that as well. Also, again, people, there are a lot of people who are uh, emotions are there's emotional baggage, there's an emotional economy, and a lot of people like to take advantage of that as well. Yeah, Michael says, I've also DM'd a player who ran a Draconic Sorcerer. There was literally a comment at our table where someone said, well, we all know who the next villain is. Yeah. Not, there was a comment, Adam, we were who DM'd me. Doesn't matter. We were having a little back and forth about Batman, and like I made I jokingly was like, well, yeah, Batman, given a certain context, is pretty damn evil considering what he does and how he does it. Like, but you know, I in the comment I said was, can you blame him? And he's like, yeah, I can. I'm thinking, sure, like Magneto, we all understand why Magneto does what he does, but like, yeah, but he does it. You like might not want to do that. Oops, sorry. Dante says for cleric, an invading extraplanar god or usurper god or whatever could start a whole cult of mutated clerics. Exactly. Or in a strange way, the worship of a godling could be the impetus for the mutation itself. Like I think it would make perfect sense for example, cultists that worship a dark fiend or a dark god to be changed into what we would consider tieflings. Like over time, this is where we want to go, and so the population going like, we hate tieflings, and one person's like, I was just born this way. I don't know what you're talking about, but there's a religious cult that's spreading throughout the world that's doing such a thing. Absolutely. Heck, clerics, the epitome of a cleric might be changing into some of those monsters in the monster manual, like a shadow demon or a naga or something like that. Like that might be the epitome. Mike Gould says a world where low or no magic exists could have an X-Man feel for any new spellcaster. It would be a restarting of the hated witch trials. I brought up very early, like the witch trials makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. Don't let an errant wizard miscast a spell, because that might color everyone else's feelings about it. Or most people don't see the difference between your classic monster manual hag and a third level wizard. Like you're both the same, and they're like, no. Flipping the book open on page 87, you're like, no, you're exactly the same. Right? Steve Senior, hey, what's going on there, dude? Says, what good does all my training mean when they are born able to lift, carry, or whatever, more better than I am? Exactly. Like, human beings, we don't like, while we may place these individuals on pedestals, there's something about people who are born better than the rest of us that we don't like. Think of Hollywood. We don't. There's something about a person who is given the physical attributes of what we would consider perfection in our modern day, and then that person who just happens to be born with physical perfection is given money and prestige, and people love them. And oh, guess what else they have? They have a perfect singing voice. Really? Oh, and they are a perfect actor. Oh, really? Again? Oh, and they just happen to be able to dance well, and they play 16 musical instruments and stuff naturally. They just came upon a piano and started playing it, and we're just like rolling our eyes like, really? Seriously? Like the Olympics is about to start up. Many of those people in the Olympics have had to struggle to get to the peak that they are. And then there's other people that are like, they're just good at it. It just came easy to them. There are sports people that are in sports and other physical activities, and we love them, but we also hate them, right? Because we love to see their downfall. So I'm with you there, Steve. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, there, co-host. Mike says the arrival of an aberrant mind sorcerer could foretell an old one, whereas a clockwork soul might foretell a Modron march. And again, the player character might not even know this. Like the player character could either be part of it and go, oh no, I can't believe that this thing is going to foretell this great horror that's going to besiege the world. Or a player character might just be rolled up into it and not have any idea what's going to happen. So both I think are possible in a world. especially if a player character is kind of innocent in it. But I think it makes a better story if they are part of it and they can't stop it. Um, Mike Gould goes on to say, Thul, his fantasy world, had a past war where goblins served a demonic invasion. That was maybe 1,000 years ago. The Carginian Empire, Carginian Empire kills all goblins on sight to this day. And again, we know that the goblinoid races, bugbears, orcs, half orcs, your hobgoblins, goblins, kobolds are now player character options. But I still think there's space for the prejudice, at least in a corner of your world, because humanity is like that. Even if you have a realm of just Dragonborn that hates everybody else, vice versa. So I think there's space for it. Vampanoid says, so Twitch is like a warlock patron? What do you mean people just give you stuff? Yeah. How are they making 50 grand a month just by people giving them stuff? What makes them better than I am? Right? Yeah. They're just playing video games. How the hell are they making $1 million a year? Oh man. I hear you, Vamp. Mike says, which makes a neighboring country and going sorry, this was a continuation, which makes a neighboring country an issue as taken from Shadowrun. I had 50% of all gnomes goblinized into goblins after a wild magic event. Ooh, that might be a reason why people don't like gnomes, or maybe why gnomes don't trust goblins, or why goblins aren't trusted in the first place because they come from this origin. So yeah, absolutely. Dante says, trying to figure out what a mutant is in a world with magic would be hard to identify. Most mutants in a magic world could probably go undetected their whole lives. Well, it doesn't, I agree with you. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to literally make genetic mutants. The core essential value of the X-Men and the mutants is that individuals, through no fault of their own, are born in a world where others hate them for it, right? They didn't choose to have wings or blue skin or catch on fire or grow to inordinate heights or have tentacles instead of arms. They were just born that way. So now in a magic world, that born might not be physical birth. It could be through an event. It could be from a cataclysm, like a wild magic event, a rift in the world or something. But there could be something that happens in the world that causes a change, and people that had no choice in the matter were affected by it. Like, for example, let's say there was a war 1,000 years ago, and a great cataclysm happened because they were driving around in wish-powered machines and using 10th, 11th, and 12th level magics against each other. And now the war's over, like Eberron. And now that there's generations after that, there are people who might be in existence that are passing down this arcane taint or curse or something that other people don't like lycanthropy, basically. Um, Michael says the Duchy of Ver, Verbilt, the Gnome Duchy, and its capital of Stavros are the economic center of Thul. So if the Empire invades, this should be the second part. So Stavros becomes an argument discussion of identity, sovereignty, race, and freedom. Uncle Fred is a goblin now. He's still Uncle Fred. So how do you treat him? Exactly. Like if there's a change in someone, like going through like the lycanthropic changes, whether there's sorceress changes or something like that, we know that have even you yourself might not be changed, but your relationship with other people might change the way society looks at you. We know that many, here in the United States, let's be frank, many people here in the United States have been had their socially been ruined for just befriending black people. You're friends with them those, N words or whatever. And it's like, well, I don't get it, right? Most people are pretty unreasonable when it comes to if you aren't if you aren't my friend, you're my enemy, or if you think a different way than me, you're my enemy. So yeah, Vampanoid says mutants can just be a variant human, like a free feat level one. Yeah, it could be anything, right? Yeah, absolutely. And again, like I said, it could be something narrative, a tattoo, a strange eye color, a most mutants in the Marvel universe have not most of them, many of them that have a physical trait doesn't necessarily need to be gamified, although you could do it. Like uh, Beast had very big hands and feet, more originally more monkey-like until he became blue. Having blue skin doesn't affect anything in the game, but you could just play a human being with blue skin, and you could still be considered a mutant. Pointy ears has no game effect. Having a different eye color or hair color or whatever, none of that has any effects. But yeah, yep. Yep. Mike says it really washes with the whole X-Men discussion as far as like family members and friends changing but still being them, but having the rest of society going, no, we need to get rid of them or stay away from them, or you're not allowed to befriend them. Heck, even today there are organizations out there that are all about keeping the genetics pure, and you're like, that's pretty. Not only is that impossible, but it's too late. We are all genetic mutts, but there are people who still think about genetic purity even till today. Dante says even being a magic mutant, like an alternate source for a bloodline, still casts magic a lot the same. Without some arcane mumbo jumbo investigation, they could never reveal that deep difference. Well, that depends on your world, right? Like, does a power like detect magic detect spellcasters? Dungeons and Dragons magic isn't very what's a nice way of saying this? It's not very. It doesn't have a lot of fidelity to it. So Dungeons and Dragons magic is an on-off switch. You either cast a spell or you don't, and there's not much more to it than that, right? But in a world with magic, you could very well say, you know what? Those displacer beasts that people walk around with as as guard dogs in cities, they can smell it. Or when someone casts an identify or a detect magic spell, you glow with this great power or something, if you don't want to have a physical change. So yeah, I think there's a way to do it. And mind you, we're world building, so we don't have to we don't have to align with damn near anything. We could do whatever the hell we want, right? Mike Gould says there's literally a wild magic effect that turns your skin blue. Yeah, there sure is. Yep. And yeah, like yeah, pure genetics is a myth. It sure is. Or technically, I guess you could say we are all mutants from a genetic um, hodgepodge, much like dog breeding. Like we shouldn't be separate genetically, but we are kind of thing. Vampanoid says, "Here, have a free feat. Just roll on that mutation table." Yep, that would make things very interesting. Yeah, have your players thinking like, "Wait a minute, can I take a look at the genetic mutation table?" And you smile at them, you lean in close, and you go, "No." Wait, what? Roll percentile dice, D100, and oh, by the way, don't roll double odds. You're gonna have to roll twice. No, but absolutely, I would do that. Yeah, let the players choose and say, hey, you want an extra feat, or you want this other, you want this other ability or something like that, or you want a free ability. There's a give and take. You can be given something, but something's going to be not taken away from you, but you get an additional limitation because Dungeons and Dragons doesn't have. We don't have a um, we don't have like a gift and flaw system where you're able to gain benefits but also pick the same number of points in flaws. But I think it would fit though, Vampanoid. I like that idea. Dante says you could have that as a reveal for a villain. Everyone knows they're a sorcerer. They're a sorcerer in an arcane bloodline world, but in an epic battle, it comes out that the villain is fire plane born or whatever. Maybe all magic does come from other planes of existence, and people are afraid of that. It's not just about the origins, but it's about how people are treated because of their origins. Mike says, if you'd like to make your world post-apocalyptic, a past event could explain like displacer beasts as mutated panthers, gnolls as mutated hyenas, demons are mutated people. Yep. Vampanoid's like, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah. Hey, APCs, you want something? Sure. All right. Let's see how deep you'll go down the path of the die roll. Michael says, or riffing on Firefly. Ooh, Firefly. Humanoids could be a product of experimentation, like the Reavers. Yes, I would, I would, I like that idea. I would be careful that it's not anything. Not only is it not anything by choice, but it might be something that's a little bit unpredictable as well. Like the Reavers are an experimentation created the Reavers, but then that experimentation goes wild and there's other people out there. Otherwise, you could very easily find the origin and cap off that origin and you're done. Um, Mutation in the Marvel comics is a thing that you yes, they've gone through reboots because it gets too big, it gets too unwieldy, and they come up with an event that kills off or destroys or gets rid of the mutant gene, and it comes back again. But despite that ebb and flow, it's a thing that can't be stopped, and not just can't be stopped, but it can't really be predicted too much, except through a lot of trial and error. Oh, my Gould says I had forgotten Genasi as a half. There's another source, and of course, if you really want to embrace a lot of the D&D isms, we can go with like anything that's extraplanar might just be hated by people living on the prime material plane because of the past experiences. Like, who's to say that there weren't other 20th level characters in the past that had a great battle with extra dimensional beings, and humanity is now at the point where we're just like, you know what, we're pretty damn sick and tired of of you of you individuals like destroying our world. We don't like you anymore, and every time we see another one of you poking your heads up out of the ground, or and I say that euphemistically, like any being that draws power from the outer planes of existence is something that needs to be stopped. And of course, player characters like, well, I get my power from the plane of fire. That's technically not an outer plane. And then the mortal human being smacks him in the back of the head, like, we don't care what your explanation is. You're drawing power from another plane of existence. You need to be put down. Now, lastly, I will say that the the ebb and flow socialistically of the X-Men and their adversaries in terms of the love, the hate, where do they reside, where these beings come from, their transformation from hero to villain and back again, the tactics that they use, whether they use pure terrorism and evil and torture, whether they are self-sacrificial, whether they choose to be the way that they are or not. When there's a mutant cure, do you choose to have that cure given to you? If you're a sorcerer, and you draw your power from the plane of fire, when given the opportunity, do you cut that off so that you can live a normal life, or do you embrace it? Yep. Yep. Lastly, Mike says that would become monologues by the villainous doctor. Sorry, dear boy, the code is in your blood now. The mutation starts with you. Perhaps you should have uh, perhaps you should have constant before having children, or maybe constrain yourself. Points to expecting. It points to the expecting mother. Yeah, 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 yeah. Like, maybe it's your fault. The person's like, I just wanted to have children and be with my loved one, and it's like, no, it's kind of your fault. Yeah, it's pretty much your fault. Now, of course, then you start talking about pretty. We can go down a dark path of like eugenics and breeding camps, and we've already seen in our own society about um, euthanizing and forced forced abortions and forced hysterectomies and things like that. All those crimes committed on people here on U.S. soil. So yeah, we've had encampments of everything from internment camps for and child camps to get rid of the cultures of native peoples, to internment camps for Japanese, to slavery and all that kind of stuff for people who are just different. And the the X-Men very much represent that. So I think taking real world examples and layering on top of it something arcane, I think it really fits. Oh, it's supposed to be considered. Yeah, I'll get to the point. Mike says, I see elves as very anti mutant. They're literally purists who live forever. Imagine their reaction to those who gain extra life and affect their environment via mutation. Elves could very well be the progenitors of air quotes mutant hate. Although you could flip the script on it and just say, well, elves are kind of mutants too, if you think about it. But of course, no one points at themselves as being different. Large groups like to point at other people for being different. Yeah, but anyway, guys, thank you very much. There is anyway. Please do a deep dive into the X-Men, into the X-Men and the X-Men's world. It's pretty deep, and over various stories and generations, including like going into outer space and different dimensions and through time. The X-Men have always been like this motley crew of individuals. What I really used to love, I know they don't really do this anymore, but I always loved the idea that the X-Men all had limitations that they had to try to grow into. Wolverine had uncontrolled rage. Psychic characters had things where they were uncontrolled. Cyclops always has to wear his glasses because his eye beams keep shooting out. And I've always loved the idea that they were born with a thing that they really couldn't quite control. And I think as a game master, dungeon master, we could pull on that by like having certain unconscious, maybe arcane effects or things like that happening in the world because of the player characters. If they stay somewhere too long, or it's manipulated like through unconscious behavior or sleeping. Ride Eternal, shiny and chrome. Valhalla! Slow motion jump in the air with flaming spears off of one vehicle to another. Talk about a person who manipulated his own kids into being sacrificial lambs. Yeah. And when one kid could complete their mission, was just like, go away. Whatever. Just because you're a mutant, whatever. Mutant kid with a bad blood or something, using blood bags and all that kind of stuff. What a great movie. But anyway, guys, thank you very much for being part of the show. I really appreciate it. Again, if you've gone this far, I know you want to follow the show. I know you want to subscribe. I know you want to hit the notification bell. We go live Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please, thank you very much for being part of the show. As you guys know, this show is TriCast on Facebook, and the audio gets punched out to our own Discord server, and we're over on Twitch, and we're on YouTube, so you can take part in the show on all those as well. So guys, thank you very much. Thank you for being part of the show. I really appreciate it. Everybody have a great one. I'll see you later.